It's no secret that Hollywood movies, either those on the big screen or Netflix originals, are boring. They're full of the same cast, use the same story structures, and the same bells, whistles, gimmicks, and tricks to deceive viewers into thinking they've actually watched a good movie. One particularly prominent storytelling technique that stands above all others in this aspect is the Rashomon Effect. The Rashomon Effect, a storytelling and narrative structure named for and popularized by Akira Kurosawa's 1950 masterpiece, is commonly defined as using alternating perspectives and points of views to paint an ambiguous picture of the truth. When we see something take place on the screen, we assume it to be true at first, until other accounts contradict it. I'm here to tell you that this commonly peddled misinterpretation of the film is a downright lie, and it shows a deep misunderstanding of the film. The film is an amazing work of art, without a doubt, from the shots on people's faces and expressions, to the way it plays with points of view and an, at the time, rather unconventional narrative structure. It gives a deep insight into the human psyche. Desires, insecurities, and societal expectations are ripped out and laid bare for all viewers to see. The film was a breakout when it came to the United States, becoming the highest grossing foreign film at the time, and winning the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, as well as an Academy Award. Having inspired many movies released since, it has had a profound impact on the American film industry. Despite its influence on Hollywood, however, the impression most American filmmakers took away from the film is dead wrong. See, Rashomon and the Rashomon Effect have little to do with the importance of truth or how varying perspectives makes the truth hard to find. Fundamentally, this movie is about power and about human nature, with the objective truth being an afterthought. Furthermore, because of this horrific misinterpretation of the movie and its true meaning, a horrible virus now lives in Hollywood and is eating it alive from the inside out. The film opens with a heavy downpour and two men sitting under the titular Rashomon Gate, once a proud hallmark of Japan's imperial class, but now a decayed structure representing the hollowed-out moral character of the country at the time. The two men sitting under the gate, a monk and a woodcutter, discuss the horrible tale they just heard. But more importantly than how grotesque it is, they talk about how utterly incomprehensible the chain of events is. They are soon joined by a commoner seeking refuge from the rain. The commoner hears the conversation and wants to know what the fuss is about, and after some goading, the woodcutter gives his account of the trial, where a man tragically had his life taken. The woodcutter recalls he had found the body in a bamboo grove while looking for trees to chop down, and reported it to the local authorities. This is where the plot of the movie begins to kick off. When you watch the film, the characters themselves explain their backgrounds and their relationship to the overall situation. There are 3 testimonials taken, and so we get 4 accounts of the story: the bandit, the samurai who died, the samurai's wife, and the woodcutter recounting the court case, all having different perspectives on what actually happened. Tajumaru, the bandit, tells his side of the story first. He says that day he had no intention of taking the man's life, and actually would have preferred not to. But due to a gust of wind blowing by, revealing the beautiful face of the samurai's wife, Tajumaru was determined to have her for himself. He told a lie, one of many in the film, that he had found a stockpile of nice swords and mirrors to lure the man into the thicket. Once there, he tied him up, then brought the man's wife to him under the guise that he had fallen ill. With the couple trapped, Tajumaru took advantage of the man's wife, and even at this point admitted that he didn't want to kill the man, but the wife goaded them to fight, saying that she would go with the winner of the duel. Tajumaru, enthralled at her fiery spirit, decided he must have her for himself at any cost, and gladly entered into the duel. Tajumaru freed the samurai, and they began to fight. After a dramatic sword fight, with excellent cinematography, Tajumaru won, taking down the samurai. The wife, meanwhile, fled the scene during the combat, and he never saw her again. In Tajumaru's telling of the story, we see a bandit full of bravado, claiming that the samurai fought valiantly, better than anyone he had faced before, in fact. The truth was the furthest thing from his mind. Tajumaru's telling of the story was to give us insight into who he was as a person. He wanted to be seen as a brave, cunning warrior, having felled even a mighty, reputable samurai. He wanted to appear as the pinnacle of masculinity, such that, even if he were arrested and prosecuted, his name would spread far and wide. While it wouldn't give him power in a physical or political sense, it would bolster his reputation, which, in a society like ancient or even modern Japan, or even here in the United States, is tantamount to one's livelihood. The wife is the next to give her testimonial, corroborating that Tajamaru had in fact taken them to the grove and assaulted her. But rather than fight with the samurai over her, Tajamaru left after taking his sword, laughing maniacally, satisfied with his conquest. She went to her husband's side to free him, but after undoing his ropes, he didn't move. He only glared at her coldly. Rather than feel pity, disappointment, rage, or concern, he looked at her with eyes like ice, full of scorn and hatred. She pleaded with him to punish her in any way he saw fit, but to stop looking at her with those eyes. As she pleaded with him, she unsheathed the dagger of her own, and in order to get him to cease his judging gaze, she took his life. In this version of the story, it's revealed to us the status of women in this kind of society, as passively going along with whatever is happening to them, rather than being active agents in their own lives. Further emphasized in the feelings of this incident is the main source of her value being chastity and fidelity. The idea that she might be with another man, even against her will, was a horrific crime in her husband's eyes, hence the cold looks. To the woman, she suffered a fate worse than death, to be seen as a woman without value, to be shamed, to be judged, and to bear this curse forever. This was far too much for her to handle, as she herself says, and rather than deal with the weight of her husband's judgment, she lashed out and took his life. After this, the movie takes a supernatural and religious turn, where we get the perspective of the samurai himself. The court brought in a spiritual medium who, after quite an impressive dance, channeled the spirit of the man himself. A quick aside, I must say, the sound design during this part is spectacular. The speaker they used to play his voice made it sound as if he really were speaking from the underworld. Speaking through the channeler, the samurai said that Tajamaru was on his way out, and that it in fact was his wife who had pleaded with him to take the samurai's life and to take her with him. Tajamaru found this abhorrent and threw her to the ground. Tajamaru then put his foot on the woman, turning to the samurai, allowing him to decide her fate. The woman escaped, however, and quickly fled. Tajamaru pursued her, but to no avail. He returned sometime later and freed the samurai, then went on his way. The samurai, now alone, couldn't shake the thoughts of the horrible betrayal he had just suffered. After some contemplation, he went for the woman's dagger, took it, and thrust it through his own chest to preserve his honor as he passed to the next life. The samurai wanted sympathy as well, but in a different way from his wife. He wanted to be known as a man, horribly tricked and betrayed, and abandoned by his wife at the end of his life. He was an honorable man who took the code of Bushido, the path of the warrior, to its dark, cold, lonesome, and solemn end. The film uses multiple perspectives and a non-linear story structure, to be sure, so it is easy to misunderstand the film. In fact, during filming, Kurosawa's own directors had trouble understanding the film. Roger Ebert writes on his website, shortly before the filming was to begin on Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa's 3 assistant directors came to see him. They were unhappy. They didn't understand the story. If you read it diligently, he told them, you should be able to understand it, because it was written with the intention of being comprehensible. They would not leave. We believe we have read it carefully, and we still don't understand it at all. Kurosawa was clearly fed up here, but having watched the film once when I was 17, and again a few weeks ago in preparing for this video, I agree with him. There are a few reasons why Rashomon is such a famous, yet often misinterpreted film. One major reason is that very same fame. When a movie spreads among the masses, it is bound to have some viewers who don't understand it. Especially with a foreign film with subtitles, cultural barriers, reading speed and reading comprehension can get in the way of fully understanding a film. Outside of that, the focus on the technical filming aspects, the shifting of camera angles, and the retelling of the story from different perspectives can hold a lot more weight in people's minds than the narrative underneath the structure. On top of that, when we see a bandit that seems really cool or living life on the edge with a charismatic personality, or a beautiful woman crying her eyes out while she recounts a horrible experience, or even a ghost speaking to us from beyond the grave, these spectacular theatrical elements might make it harder to actually listen to what they're saying, and more importantly, why they're saying it. But that's exactly where the story and the narrative of Rashomon do their heavy lifting. It shows us not a movie about perspectives, camera angles, and non-linear storytelling for the sake of cheap tricks and novelty, but to show the core thesis of the film, the unquenchable human thirst for power and control. See, to the characters in the story, the act of taking someone's life, or taking your own life, was a small price to pay for control over their own reputations. In this era of Japanese society, as well as in our own modern era of social media, Instagram filters, and media control, reputation is everything. It is the source of a great deal of human power, even if that power is simply to be able to get someone to feel bad for you. It's the characters themselves and who they are as people, not the alternating perspectives, that show us what the movie is truly about. The perspectives themselves don't even really matter, as I'll explain to you shortly. The movie Rashomon was based on 2 short stories by Ryunosuke Akutagawa, one of my favorite authors of all time. Many of Akutagawa's stories revolve around the darker and more horrific aspects of the human psyche, with mental illness and betrayal often taking center stage. And the stories for the basis of this film, one titled Rashomon and the other titled In a Grove, are no exception. While I highly recommend you read both stories and become familiar with Akutagawa's work, I'll give you a quick synopsis to catch you up to speed. In the short story Rashomon, we encounter a man at both a moral and literal crossroads. The Rashomon was a gate in Kyoto during the Heian period from 794 to 1185 that acted as the main gate to the city, leading to the main road of Kyoto and the Imperial Palace area. By the 1200s, the gate fell into disrepair due to natural disasters, political turmoil, as Japan shifted from an aristocratic society led by the emperor and his family to a military society run by a shogunate. The gate, in utter dilapidation, became an emblem of downfall of Japanese society. In Akutagawa's story, a wandering samurai found himself at the ruins of the gate, known as a place where beggars and the impoverished would gather, contemplating if he should rob someone in order to make it through to the next day. There, he came across a woman stealing hair from corpses strewn about in the upper level of the gate, and decided to rob her as a punishment for her transgressions. Thus, we get the primary setting for Kurosawa's film. In Akutagawa's story In a Grove, we get the primary story behind Kurosawa's film. A woodcutter goes to the local courthouse and tells the magistrates he found the dead body of a recently slain samurai, and 3 witnesses are brought to testify what happened. The witnesses, the bandit, the samurai's wife, and through a spiritual medium, the slain man himself from the bowels of the underworld. The 3 share their perspectives and reveal, inadvertently, their own motives, psychological hang-ups, and personal flaws, something that is more heavily emphasized in Kurosawa's retelling. At the end of the film, we believe we've gotten the truth from the woodcutter, who calls everyone on the stand liars and who shares what he saw as well. However, this is called into question by the commoner who, upon hearing his story, asked the man why he didn't report it to the police. At first, the woodcutter says he didn't want to get involved, but the commoner later surmises that it was because the woodcutter also took part in the crime, having stolen the valuable dagger from the body after all was said and done. With his morality and version of the story called into question, we see that none of the accounts are trustworthy. But if none of the accounts are trustworthy, then it means the actual truth of what happened doesn't matter. Indeed, we can see in the original short story, as well as the film, are not about perspectives. They're about power. The bandit and his physical strength and cunning, having defeated the samurai and taken his wife, the wife of the samurai, wanting sympathy for the horrible attack on her, and finding none in her husband, claims to have slain him in order to escape his wrath and cold judgment. The samurai claims to have done it to himself in order to die honorably after what he perceived as a dishonorable loss to a common thug and a horrible betrayal of his wife. He curses him for his predicament, now banished to the dark, cold underworld for an eternity. Each of them want to present a face to the world, or the magistrate in this case, as control over the narrative gives them the most power they can get in this incredibly chaotic and tragic situation. The fact that the film was also drawn from 2 stories, and named for the story that does not present the plot, hammers home the point even further. Kurosawa chose to name his film not for the story that most accurately represents the inspiration, but from the story with the name that gave the most prestige and evoked the most historical and emotional weight. Now, dear viewer, you might be saying to yourself, that's all well and good, but how is it destroying Hollywood? See, artists, filmmakers, content creators, and the like are known for borrowing ideas from successful works of art for their own. This is the basis of inspiration, and is overall a good thing. But when the inspiration comes from a lie, the works that are created become shallow, cowardly, and miss the point entirely. Since Rashomon's debut in the United States, we've seen a long list of movies that use alternating perspectives, non-linear storytelling, and to try and play up this, quote-unquote, the truth is hard to find angle, to try and be deep. But underneath the bells and whistles are either boring, terrible films at best, or at worst, movies that have all the ingredients of a great work of art, but like a mash of the finest eggs, the best flour, and the purest sugar don't actually make a good cake because the oven hasn't been turned on. And it's a shame, really, because in researching for this film, I watched quite a few movies that I think try to employ the Rashomon effect, but because of the prevailing public misperception, turn out to be utter dog water. Some of them box office hits with mixed reviews, and others complete bombs. But so long as the executives and scriptwriters of Hollywood think to themselves, oh, I'm so smart and deep for using different perspectives and storylines in my movie is so interesting, I'm just like Kurosawa, and the people turn up putting seats in chairs, nothing's going to change. We'll keep seeing shallow storytelling that makes up for its weakness through fast editing cuts, overwhelmingly large casts of characters, and horribly butchered storytelling that gives a sort of sugar rush of engagement without leaving the audience something to really chew on and think about, or a truly compelling emotional experience once the credits roll. I noticed this was particularly prevalent in movies about controversial topics, which is disappointing. Art, after all, is meant in part to entertain and in part to hold up a mirror to people, to society, and show them who they really are inside. One such movie is Crash, from 2004, which actually won Best Motion Picture the year after. The movie is about race, in particular, the tense racial atmosphere in the United States post-September 11th. It features a wide cast of characters and overlapping, interlocking narratives that connect to a car crash shown in the beginning of the film. We see the discrimination against African Americans, a long-standing issue in the United States, and it ties into somewhat more recent discrimination against Middle Easterners stemming from the attacks, as well as all the simmering racial tension and overall societal disarray in between. Different storylines intersect, with the Asian man that Anthony and Peter accidentally hit with the car that they stole from Sandra Bullock and her husband, turning out to be a human trafficker. There's the white cop, Tom Hansen, who earlier in the film switched partners because his racially profiled and sexually harassed a couple during a traffic stop in pursuit of the aforementioned stolen vehicle. However, he inexplicably developed severe racial biases at the end of the film, shooting Peter, believing him to have a gun. The Iranian man who had his store vandalized learns that because a locksmith told him to get his door fixed and he refused, that insurance wouldn't cover the break-in that happened later in the film, and decides to take his rage out on the locksmith himself. The film tricks you into thinking that he shot a little girl in cold blood as a result, until you realize later that the store owner's daughter put blanks in his gun. Racial, religious, and ethnic biases and conflict play out throughout the film from the many characters and their different perspectives. And the themes of power are hinted at, but overall we get a bunch of chaotic people boiling from rage under the LA sun, with little investigation into their own lives and what brought them to be so angry in the first place. In fact, there's a great scene where Sandra Bullock's character speaks on the phone to her friend about how every day she wakes up angry, and she doesn't know why. What's the outcome of this scene? She slips and falls down the stairs and sprains her leg. None of her friends come to see her in the hospital, so her husband makes his way over to comfort her. While the film, in my opinion, does a decent job of displaying human hypocrisy, racial tension, things like that, none of these storylines pay off beyond a simple early 2000s Saturday night special quote-unquote lesson on race. Investigations into the different powerful institutions in the US, such as the film industry and the police departments, or the underbelly of human trafficking, are not explored at any depth. Instead, you end up with a half-baked movie that seems interesting on its surface and does in fact have a lot of really interesting plot lines, but fails to deliver. Where do these racial biases come from? Why do some people suffer and others prosper in this kind of system, in this kind of society? Is there any hope for the future? Rashomon, on the other hand, answers this question excellently. The three under the gate, at the end of the film, find a baby. The commoner steals the infant's clothes, to the protests of the woodcutter and the monk. A helpless, defenseless baby, as a symbol of the consequences of power, as well as hope for the future, is completely victim to its surroundings. The commoner feeds into the hypocrisy of this fallen society, while the woodcutter, probably feeling guilty about his own transgressions, decides to mend his ways and take the child on as one of his own. The rain stops, the clouds part, as he walks away with his new child in his arms. There is hope, even in this hypocritical, fallen world, that some will use their power for good. The next movie I want to cover is the 2008 film Vantage Point, where we get a far worse use of alternative perspectives that don't even serve the plot in any way beyond giving it a caffeinated, high-octane presentation. The main plot of the movie is the attempted kidnapping and assassination of the President of the United States as he gives a speech in Spain against the backdrop of US conflicts in the Middle East. The attack is shown from the perspective of news groups covering the event, random passersby, a policeman in charge of protecting the mayor of his city in Spain, members of the US government, and the terror cell themselves. Again, it's a movie that could have explored the power dynamics inherent in this kind of plot, but instead shows us fast-paced cuts with lots of action, shooting, explosions, and the like. But once the film ends, we're left with nothing more than an action thriller. The criticisms of US foreign policy that could have been explored are trifling and unspecific, and the motives of the terror cell and even the turncoats within the US government are non-existent. A story of, oh, they hate us for our freedoms type of flick. It misses out on the opportunity to make something special. Underneath all the bells and whistles, smoke and mirrors, there's a simple assassination plot movie that we've seen plenty of times before. At least Crash gave us somewhat compelling characters that we could relate to. Vantage Point offers none of that, with all the characters seeming like stock archetypes and plot pieces, rather than real human beings with their own hopes, wishes, desires, and flaws. I would say that the movie leaves you with more questions than answers, but that would be giving it too much credit, way more than it deserves. With the only question I was left being, why the hell did I watch this trash in the first place? These movies and more have tried and failed at incorporating Rashomon's unique narrative structure. Rather than trying to make the most out of each film, they packed them full of exaggerated camera cuts and fast-paced action, and either gave us too much or too little perspective from the characters, without exploring the characters themselves. Where Rashomon succeeds is in exposition and implication, masterfully woven to show how many sides of humanity there really are. While amazing, it's been terribly misremembered, and this has created scores of filmmakers who don't understand the craft and the subtlety that go into creating a good story. Choosing the aesthetics of a good story over a good story, the movie industry suffers, and we get worse movies as a result. There is some hope, however, as during my research, I found a few movies that I felt did a much better job of employing this sort of story structure to maximum effect. Movies like Courage Under Fire, Reservoir Dogs, or more recently, Monster, all do a fantastic job of portraying the humanity inside the story and showing us the truth that Rashomon isn't about perspective. It's about the human ego, vanity, reputation, and of course, the need for power. Power is ultimately one of the main drivers of human activity, and, in the words of Orochimaru from One Piece, as he uses his own Rashomon technique, even the ego of this chaotic world can be cut in two.